Welcome to Think Enriched with Amy Robles. This is the podcast made for you, the smart, ambitious woman. Think Enriched is the show to help you think bigger, create the business you love, and keep your family first. We know when you enrich a woman's life, you help her entire circle of influence. Now here's your host, Amy Robles. So we love to be so ambitious, get all the things done, be involved, move forward, life, all of those different components. I had this episode completely edited and it was beautiful and I loved it. And then the power flickered on and off and I lost it all. I learned a valuable lesson and I might have said some things I'm not proud of. I am very excited for this episode. I've got to tell you, this one is one I think every woman on the planet needs to hear. A lot of times we have these really great ideas and then we just kind of let somebody else run with it and take it, and we don't own our own power. And as who you are, as a smart, ambitious woman, you have sway. And we're going to talk about what is sway, how to take credit when you need to take credit. And what if you're in a situation and you are getting mansplained to death and somebody just walks all over you? We've had those things happen to us. How do you handle that? How do you work on those specific examples? Our guest is in a very, very successful field in his corporate life. And he talks about different examples that specifically apply to each one of us, what we're doing, how life is moving forward, and how to improve. And I really hope you take time, listen. This might be an episode you take notes. And so with that, here we go. All right, I am delighted to have this week's guest. Wow, we have a lot to learn from our guest today. Welcome to the show, Mark Slemons.
Oh, Amy, I'm really glad to be here. It's so cool to get to do a podcast with you. This is a highlight for sure.
You are hosting the Leader to Leader podcast. Definitely something I'm learning from. What's been the biggest lesson as you've been going through this process?
Oh my goodness. I think like everyone, what you think is going to be something that you can manage and incorporate into your schedule, you find sometimes is a little bit tougher than you expected. But I love it because it really keeps me engaged. And it's one of the things that I appreciate about having any kind of regular media engagement. It doesn't matter whether it would be a blog post or a podcast or anything else like that. You're forced into this position of having to really get your head around things that you think add significance and meaning to people's lives. And I've loved that. It's not always easy. Sometimes time is an issue and you don't always have as much time as you would like to be able to do everything that you would like, but it's great fun. And I think it really challenges me. I think I'm learning more maybe than anybody else who's listening. So that's the thing I love the most about it.
Oh, that's excellent. And you are still working full time in the corporate life. Then you've got other life, the rest, all the full package of what life is, squeezing in the podcast as it's gone on. And I love how you have been so consistent. What has kept you to stay so consistent in that process?
Well, I think part of what I learned early on was that you had to, before you even started with the podcast, you had to commit yourself to the process, your willingness to do it no matter what. And I made a decision from the time I released my first episode that I would release my podcasts on Monday, and that's when I do it. And I started out with that commitment that no matter what happened in life, I was going to make sure that I got the podcast done and I got it to release every Monday. That I think it started out with maybe the mental commitment. And that sounds a little cliche, I guess, when I think about it that way. But I really did decide ahead of time that no matter what, I was going to make it happen. And I admit there are times whenever I look back at some of the ones that I've done, especially some of the ones that were done early on, and I think, man, some of that I wish I could redo because it doesn't sound the way I want it to sound, but done is better than perfect. I guess, to use another cliche. And I've appreciated the ability to just commit to the process, get it turned out, and move on to the next one.
Have you always been able to do that? The done is better than perfect? Or are you someone that struggles with that process?
No, I think my tendency, my wife Ginger would tell you that my tendency is to be more of a perfectionist, I guess. I've had to learn how to deal with that tendency and to try my best to put that aside and focus on the task at hand, and get the work done, whatever it is, and maybe not necessarily have it be perfect by the time I'm done. That wasn't natural to me at all, and I think I'm a pretty good example of what can happen if you're going to focus on producing output. And it's not like you stop thinking, oh, I don't care how this sounds, or I don't care if this is going to be any good or not. It's just the decision that really, in order to manage my ability to get everything done that needs to be done, I have to say, this is a really good effort and I'm okay with that. But that's not my natural tendency. I would overanalyze. I'm one of those people who wants to know everything about the next thing I'm going to do before I do it. And that is something you have to work against. You have to guard against losing too much time in that process, I guess.
Such great perspective.
But not easy, right?
Oh, so hard. It took me months before I was ready to just go live with what I had created. And now looking back, those first episodes, they were the best I could do at the time, and how it has grown and progressed. I can just see, and every time is just learning and getting a little bit better, and how that applies to so many facets of life. Would you agree?
I think I definitely would agree. And I think if you go back and listen, so you were on with me in episode 8 on the Leader to Leader podcast. And I think people should go out and listen to that, because I think what you find whenever you go out and listen to content like that, and then you listen to what content you're releasing today on Think Enriched, I think that what you find is that even though it might not sound the same way, because, you learn things, you do things differently, maybe you get more comfortable with a microphone or whatever, what you find is that there's a maturation of the ideas and the things that you wanted to convey, the things that you knew would be meaningful to people. And to see that progress, I think, is really powerful. And I see it, like, it's easier for me to see it with you, Amy, than to see it with myself. And that's just maybe how humans work. We don't see necessarily the improvement ourselves. It's one of the reasons why our topic today is so pertinent.
I love it. And so I've been following your everything that you've been going through this whole process. It's been incredible to see. And then a couple of weeks ago, it was a 2-part series, Brag, Swag, or Sway, Why You Must Talk About Yourself. Mark, I was having like this fangirl moment. I was cleaning the house, going through some things, and it was on, and everybody was gone. It was just me. And I was like, yes! Oh my gosh, my girls need to hear this. Yes! Yeah.
It was fun there. And that feeling that you get whenever you know that you're onto something, like something is really, it's more than just relevant. Like, that if you can get a hold of this, and when I say you, I mean, sometimes it's you yourself. If you can get a hold of this, that it'll actually make a significant difference in your own life. And so you have that hope, that anticipation that it could do the same for somebody else who's listening. I think, like everything, you're always standing on the shoulders of the people who've gone before. And so there's a lot of that content that we deal with on a week in, week out basis on podcasts that you recognize is directly attributable to all of the people who've had so many good things to say before us. Sometimes it's just your voice saying it in a different way that resonates with someone. And so it was exciting to me. I loved those 2 episodes in this short period of time. I mean, it hasn't even been a year, but I think that they were 2 of the ones that I personally enjoyed the most. If people want to hear them, they're certainly able to go out and listen to them. I think they were episodes 40 and 41. But yeah, I really connected with the content of those 2 episodes.
That got me thinking, sometimes the women that are listening to my show regularly are so busy taking care of others. They're involved in their lives. They've got 7 different projects going on. And in their mind, they're doing all of these different things and they put themselves aside. And I just kept thinking, man, they need to hear this. Why is it so important, especially for women that we're focusing on today, that they need to take time to talk about themselves?
I think the most important thing to consider is that when it comes to establishing your own credibility, you have to talk about yourself. And it presents this conflict. It presents this internal battle that we have with ourselves, especially if you've been brought up with a strong foundation in abstinence. I'm going to call it abstinence from pride. This idea that somehow you're going to get a big head. And, we all know Proverbs says that pride goeth before a fall, right? And so you've got all of these things rattling around in your brain that make you think that somehow that means that I can't really tell people about the good things that I'm doing. And what's weird, Amy, is that it matters even if you're just talking about a spousal relationship between a husband and a wife. I think that even if you're just talking about the stuff that happens at home, it's important for you and for a listener and for a woman who maybe just finds herself in a position in life at the moment where she maybe is not doing everything that she's capable of doing, but she is doing things that are relevant. And this is the part that I find really crazy, is that we undermine and we underestimate the significance of our contribution even in the home. And society does that too, right? I mean, so if you're a homemaker, then there's this pressure on you that somehow you don't measure up if you don't have a career. If you're not working 60 hours a week out in the corporate world, then somehow, you've missed out on what it is that you should be doing as a woman. And it just completely overlooks this ability that you have as one of the most capable and important people on this earth, the contribution that you make in your home and to your children, to your spouse. And this goes for men who stay at home as well. I think that there's a complex, maybe even more so for a man who chooses to stay at home and his wife goes to work every day. This idea that somehow that means you're less than. There's significance in everything that we do, and we have to find it and we have to talk about it, because this notion that your great work speaks for itself while you are humble and unassuming, it's not a reality. We'd like to think that it automatically gets us a raise, or it automatically attracts a new customer, or it automatically brings in the next sale because of all of this hard work that we're doing behind the scene. But that's not the reality. It's foundational, but by itself, it doesn't bring a new customer to our door. And so whether you're entrepreneurial, whether you're at home, whether you're in a corporate office environment, it's true in all of these places. Your great work isn't sufficient. People have to know about it. And that means that you have to talk about yourself. And there's no easy way around that. That's what you have to do.
And so how does somebody learn how to do that? Can we just go high level through the steps a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are several ways. We make assumptions that, especially in smaller environments where maybe, for instance, I'll use an example of volunteer effort. You make a contribution, and I'm not talking about financial, I'm just saying a contribution of your time or your talent. And it makes a difference where you're making your contribution. And you think that because it's a small, maybe a small organization, that everybody sees it, that everybody recognizes it. And, if you have a blog, or if you have a podcast or a YouTube channel, or you do Facebook Live videos, they're all good things in and of themselves, but they don't just automatically bring in business. And so you have to, first of all, conclude why you are not willing to talk about yourself. And it comes down to frequently a self-worth issue. We don't think that we've done anything valuable. We don't think we've done anything worth noting. I mentioned earlier that we significantly underestimate our contributions. But there's also this part of us that resents the people who do it excessively.
Yes.
The braggers, they did it and they told everyone often that they did it. They tell everyone how well they did it, how everyone loves what they did, and how they're going to do it again and again and again. And, you really do sometimes just get tired of hearing those things. And so you start to resent it. But, braggers have a challenge as well. And so I guess there's a fine line that we walk when we're talking about ourselves and maybe bragging. I think bragging oftentimes is focused on what's happened in the past, right? It's the glory days, and you can lose sight of today whenever you do that.
And it seems like bragging comes from this place almost of insecurity. Like, look at me, all this stuff I'm pointing at. Don't look at who I am as a whole person. That's the impression I get.
Which probably comes back to a self-worth issue sometimes. There is value in the brag, though. And I don't know that the bragger necessarily expects this as an outcome. It does instigate others to outperform. And I think that's a pretty powerful motivator sometimes. So there is a place for an amount of, we'll call it bragging, but one of the values of the brag is that somebody else looks at that and says, oh, you think you can do that so well? Well, I'm going to do it better. And it actually raises the bar. And so there can be a good side of that too. But we don't want to be seen as a bragger, but we also don't want to be seen as someone with all swag and no substance, which is another aspect of this, right? Because there's a difference between swagger and as cockiness, where swagger is this ability to look at your history of work, and it sometimes pushes you to that very edge of conceit. So where you might almost think too highly of yourself, but as opposed to somebody who's cocky, the swagger probably comes from somebody's actual historical evidence of what they've done, what they've been able to do, and they're confident of themselves. And sometimes people wear that a little bit arrogantly, and so it can come across, I guess, as a bit offensive. So we're not trying to be a braggart. We're not trying to just be all swagger. I mean, it is ultimately about sway. And the reason why sway is so important is because it's simply influence. And there is a way for people to talk about themselves, this method of taking credit for what they've done that gives someone an ability to influence others. And this is critical, Amy, and I'll say this is probably the most important point of this whole podcast. So because it's so important, I'm going to put it off until the very end, just like your favorite news show. I'm going to leave it hang out there to make sure everyone has to listen to the very end of the podcast. Then I'm going to tell you what the most important point is. And that's really not it at all. I'm totally teasing. But there's an art to conveying your accomplishments that brings you the recognition that you deserve. And if there's one thing that you walk away from this hearing me say today, it's that it's okay to talk about yourself in a way that gives you credit for your capabilities, for your talents, for your results. You want people to see that. And I'm going to talk about a few ways that you can do that enable you to not come across as braggadocious or arrogant or conceited. Although there will be some who will look at a track record of accomplishment, and just because you've actually done something, they're going to say that you're being arrogant. But that's the reality of it. There are always going to be people who are going to stand on the sidelines and take pot shots at the people who are doing something. But I think the first thing that you have to do, if you're interested in conveying your accomplishments and establishing sway or influence with people, you have to start by tracking your performance. And it sounds easy enough, right? But you have to track your results before you have something to talk about. So if you don't have anything to talk about, then quite honestly, this whole episode isn't going to be a lot of help, because what we want for people to be able to demonstrate their body of work. And everybody, and this is maybe just as important as the first point, everybody has a body of work. But it's up to you to communicate it. And if you think about large organizations, for example, maybe companies that are maybe multi-million or multi-billion dollar revenue generators, and maybe you only have responsibility for a small part of contribution in that very large wheel. What you recognize very quickly in those environments is that you can't talk about the revenue that you generated, because by comparison, maybe your portion is 0.25% of the total revenue that the whole international conglomerate has earned. And so you figure out that what you have to talk about are things that matter to the business. You have to talk about things in a way that demonstrate the results that you're achieving in your space. And that might mean that you have to talk about things like reducing your costs by 11.4%, or improving your sales margins, or maybe reducing the dependency on a single customer because you've analyzed next best alternatives and you've increased your customer base. And these are things that, again, matter whether you're talking about entrepreneurial effort or managing the budget at home. I think that it's important to be able to show, look, I take managing our finances seriously at home. And so I show that this is the money that we said we were going to spend. And through some creative shopping, we saved $10 here. And you and I both know, Amy, that $10 is not going to change the world, but it does identify accomplishment, and you've got to track it. You have to track your performance and track your results so you have something to talk about.
You know, you're so right. And even in that situation, saving $10 at the grocery store is, you start with the small things, and maybe you're not paying attention to other areas, but building on that is not only working internally where you know you can trust yourself more, which increases the self-esteem, so you're more confident about talking about yourself, but actually having numbers to prove that is a way to present that to the world. There's a lot of times where women are going from, I've been doing this for this whole time, and now I'm going back into the job force. And how do I do that? And I can see how an employer would love to hear, look, I was able to cut our family expenses, and I was able to do this. I'm very comfortable handling this smaller budget, and I'll be able to apply these principles in that way. That wouldn't be a brag.
No, not at all. You're demonstrating competency. And sometimes the person you have to prove it to is yourself, that you really are doing things that are making a difference. And whether they're on a small and personal scale, or maybe a large scale because you've impacted how an organization operates, you're proving to yourself that you have something that is valuable, that it can contribute to the benefit of the person utilizing your talent, your capability. Pamela Jett has an audio presentation called Mind Your Own Business, and she recommends using what she refers to as a glory file. And this is a really great concept, I think, because one of the things that we're not very good at, most of us, is keeping track of all of the things that are building up this historical track record of achievement. They're the positive things that people have said about you. They're performance reviews. They're successful projects that you were a part of where, you know, the organization had an expectation you delivered on time and on budget. They're interpersonal encounters where somebody complimented you about your capability in a certain area. And it sounds trivial, but you have to build the body of evidence for yourself that says, I'm making a contribution. I'm making an improvement in the lives of the people that I'm serving. And I think you have to keep track of every meaningful thing that people say about you to remind yourself that you're doing things that make a difference. And if you don't do it, like most of us don't, then the thing that you're going to remember whenever somebody asks is the thing that's happened most recently. And that may or may not be the most significant thing that's happened in the last year, or in the last 5 years, or in the last 10 years. And you want to be able to bring to memory those things that confirm that you're competent, that you're capable, that you're going to be able to make a difference for the people that you serve. And you have to keep track of it yourself because nobody's going to do it for you.
And the first time I had heard something like this, I thought, that's weird, right? But I started doing this, just having a little file on my computer, on my desktop. So when I'm feeling that, it's kind of turned into, there's that voice inside of my head and it's saying, what are you doing? What, all of that questioning, that self-doubt. And so there'll be times where I just need to go read it and say, whoa, I did this. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I stepped in and learned the skill that I needed to move forward. And so sometimes you're collecting these pieces. No one may ever see it, but it's just for you to step forward and be able to have more confidence in yourself. Great point, Mark.
Build the body of evidence, Amy. I mean, you have value. And this is true for every single person that's listening. You have a ability to look at your life and identify those places where people have said that you've brought value. And you need to remind yourself about it. The second thing, though, after you've built the body of evidence, is you got to talk about your results. It seems really noble to just toil along in obscurity, right? And, I'm just going to keep my hand to the plow, just scrub this floor. And, I'm sure somewhere someone's going to find a way to acknowledge my efforts, or it's just going to show up on its own. But you have to find a way to communicate your contributions, and you have to do it regularly. Some people do things like this was another idea that Pamela Jett had. Some people do things like send their manager emails on a monthly or quarterly basis, and she calls it an "I'm great" update. But it's really nothing more than reminding your manager, your boss, yourself, that these are the things that I've done over this last short period of time that are demonstrating that I'm moving, that I'm taking action, that I'm producing a result. But here's the thing that I think is important about that we sometimes overlook. What people don't want to hear about is how great you are. And that's not what Pamela was saying when she talked about the "I'm great" update. It wasn't about how great I am. It's about recognizing that your achievement, your results are positioning the business, the organization, the individual to be able to succeed. Your customer, they want to know that what you're doing is benefiting them. So think about that when you're tracking performance. Do not be humble about the value that you create. Don't be silent about your accomplishments. Arrogance might not be acceptable, but if you're too modest, you're not helping yourself. And, I think that this is something that we all, again, probably struggle a little bit about, or struggle with a bit. You have to keep this in mind. If I look at this from the customer's perspective, what are they going to see in this and hear in this that's going to trigger in their minds that Mark, that Amy, that the listener today has an ability to help me with this particular situation? Because even though they're talking about themselves, what they're really talking about is how they helped their customer achieve the result that they were looking to achieve.
Okay, so listening to
talk about your results.
I wrote down, if you're too modest, you're not helping yourself. How do you know what the difference between being humble and, sharing the credit where it's due, and you're being too modest and you're devaluing yourself?
Well, I'll tell you that most of the people I know, Amy, err on the side of humility and modesty. So start there with the assumption that you're probably not giving yourself the credit that you're due. In some cases, people, for instance, on a team, will think that there's not room for me to take credit for my contribution. And the idea that somehow if you take credit that you're overshadowing the team, and that we do this even in individual settings where, we don't take credit for what we've done because, I don't want to, it's so insignificant. It appears so insignificant to me. My answer to that question is assume that you're being too humble or modest. I think that you have to say, these are the things that I want people to know about me. And you can say it in a way that doesn't come across as arrogant. But you have to remember that if you don't say it, there's nobody out there who's going to do it for you. I think we think sometimes that when we put out that blog post or we put out that podcast, that automatically somewhere along the way, someone's going to discover us and, they'll see the relevance and it'll, skyrocket me to whatever contribution that I intended to make or I visualize myself making. I don't think it happens that way very often. I think really, for the most part, you have to tell people about the good things that you're doing. And that's not bragging. When you're talking about how you're helping other people to achieve their goals and objectives through the work that you're doing in helping them, that's not a brag. That's just establishing a track record, creating that body of evidence. Assume that you're being too humble.
So good. So good. A lot of times, especially, we tend to just put other people forward and minimizing what we're doing. And I can see how that's something that can happen repeatedly.
Third thing, I think, is you have to acknowledge that sometimes not all of the credit belongs to you. This is one of the things that I find really helpful, maybe even in part answering the question before, Amy, about, when are you being too humble or too modest? When you share the credit for the accomplishments, I think about the number of times where I know that people behind the scenes have taken credit for the work that I've done and how that makes me feel. It aggravates me, but there's nothing I can do about it. If you're not careful about how you approach that situation, you can do more damage than good. But I think a good leader, and I'm going to make an assumption that your listeners are good leaders. They want to improve their leadership skills. A good leader gives credit, shares credit for the accomplishments of the team. And so that means whenever somebody, because not everybody is ever you're not all going to be able to stand in front of the crowd and do the presentation that demonstrates the fantastic work that you've done. But when the credit comes to the individual who is presenting, I think one of the most powerful things that you can do as a leader is say, thank you. My team is really going to appreciate hearing that and knowing that the thing that we've done has made a difference. So sharing credit is really important. But then the fourth thing goes along with it. And that is when somebody's taking credit for your work and for your idea, take it back. You can't allow for people to take credit for your work and for your ideas and not put up some resistance. I think you have to address it. So maybe a good example is in a meeting room where you've had an idea and somebody else is taking credit for it. Sometimes it'll come across as childish or maybe juvenile if you're not careful about what you say. And so I'm not advocating that you don't think about what you say before you say it, but it can be really important for you to, at a point, say something like this. I'm really glad that you like my idea, and I'd love to have you help and support this initiative. Do you have some time for us to meet and talk about it further? Something that maybe it's not like, that's my idea. I can't believe you just took credit for my idea, or that was my work, or I did that. You don't have to do it like that, but you can do it creatively in a way that says, look, that was mine. I'm not going to just give it to you. And I'm happy to have you on board and work with me towards an objective, a targeted outcome. But the people in this room are not going to sit here and think that you came up with that when it wasn't your idea.
That's amazing. Have you done that in your professional life?
It's incredibly difficult to do. And I think that when I think back to the times that I've had to do that, your choice of words is really important. You're not confrontive or I should say combative. You are willing to confront. You're not willing to start a battle in front of everybody. I have done that before. I have said, man, I'm so glad that you're on board with this, because whenever I originally thought about doing this, so again, it's just another way of slipping it in. And it's not like, you took my credit, but it is about making sure that you're getting credit that you're due. That's really important, because it's up to you to get the attention, authority, and respect that you deserve. And if you leave it to other people, there will be those who will take it from you without apology.
Oh, this is so powerful. And this is a way, especially women that are in the corporate world, where they feel like, I don't know, I'm either the sweet, nice girl, or I'm the office monster, right? There's not that middle ground. But I love what you say. It is okay to stand in your power and confront the issue, but not combat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Amy, I have had, it's interesting because inclusion and diversity is like a really big topic in just about every corporate environment right now. I have had some extremely capable female leaders, and it's almost difficult for me to relate with what some of the people are struggling with when it comes to the inclusion and diversity conversation, because these women are, in many cases, the best leaders that I've worked for in 25, 30 years. And
wow.
I look at the talent that they bring, their capability that they bring, and there's going to be those times when people are going to say that you are the office witch, because you're so aggressive. But I don't think that it means that you've actually taken on that persona. I think it just means that you know how to get something done, and you know how to talk about what you've done. And there are people who are threatened by that. And so instead of giving you the middle ground and saying, you're a really great leader, instead they find stones to throw. So I guess, we all have to take into account people's perspectives of us and whether or not maybe we're too harsh or we're too easygoing. I think that's an important capability. But I do think that sometimes you have to assume that there are going to be people who are just going to throw stones just because you're actually doing something that's good. So I encourage your female listeners, step up, because you have the ability to contribute, to lead well. I've seen it demonstrated, and this is in a large multinational, $40 billion in revenue in 2017 company. And I'm seeing that there are some really great female leaders in those places. So if you feel compelled to do that, I'd encourage you to chase it, because you have something to offer. That's good. Okay, so let me go on to the next one, because this one's really important. And this is probably a place where I don't know that a female struggles with it more than a male, but I'm going to just give you an example. How many times have you heard this? Julie, great presentation today. You really nailed the point on fiscal accountability. Well, you probably have never heard that, but the point is that you've gotten a compliment for doing a great job, whatever it was that you've done. And so what does Julie do? She says something like, "Oh, it wasn't anything." But she just spent the last week collecting every minute detail to put together one of the best presentations that the boardroom had seen. Or she says something like, "Man, I was so nervous. I can't believe how many times I mispronounced sustainability." Or she says something like, "I think that might have been the single worst performance of my entire life."
Oh.
Instead, the key here, and this is the fifth point, you have to learn how to take a compliment. And so instead, a better response would be, "Thank you. I appreciate you noticing, because it didn't always feel so good to me when I was up there." Or, "Thank you. I was really nervous and I even mispronounced sustainability, but I'm glad it was still meaningful to you." You don't have to dismiss the thing that you didn't do well or the thing that you want to improve on, but learn how to take a compliment. And you have to step away from being your own worst critic and give yourself some space to actually receive a compliment, receive the praise, and actually be okay with that instead of deflecting it.
Oh, this is huge. This is something I've seen so many people struggle with, and this is something I really struggled with for a long time. And actually, my mom pulled me aside and said, every time somebody says something nice to you and you turn it down or you make fun or you insult it, what you're doing is insulting you and the other person.
Mm.
It's like you're just totally just throwing it back in their face. And that's not who you are, Amy. You've got to be able to just say, thank you. That means a lot. And that's all it has to be. And that alone helped me be comfortable meeting and connecting with new people, just being able to do that one skill.
Yeah, none of us are perfect. None of us are where we want to be. Nobody has gotten to the place, well, at least I don't know anybody who's gotten to the place where they're thinking, I'm pretty good. I don't think there's anything left to improve. I think that's going to be the lifelong struggle for all of us. So get comfortable with that. Accept the compliments when they come your way. Acknowledge the things that you'd like to improve and work on them. But I think it's really important to take a compliment. But then I think equally as important, and this is the sixth and final thing, and I'll leave you with this one thought. There are times when we ask for an evaluation or we ask for some feedback, and we get more than we bargained for. And you have to figure out how to deal with criticism. This is for those who are particularly sensitive. This can be really tough because there are people who speak before they think. There are people who say things that they would never even register with them, that they've said something offensive, or maybe they've said something in a way that crushed you. You can't get away from it. Some of the criticism, some of the feedback you're going to get is going to be harsh. There are going to be people who are only ever going to tell you about everything that you've done wrong. And sometimes that's necessary for there to be improvement. Sometimes we wouldn't see it if somebody didn't come to us and present it that way. We're blind to it. But you're never going to be able, in this environment that we're talking about, where we're creating this body of evidence, this capability, this success, this talent that we have that's going to contribute to people that we serve. We're never going to be able to get to a place where we're comfortable in our own skin until we get to the place where we can say, I'll take and consider the criticism. I'll take what's valuable in it. I'll discard the rest. There are going to be times it's going to be said to you in a way that is going to feel like you could never take anything positive from it. And I'll share this, just this one short, simple example of what you can do with it, because this was really powerful in that presentation, that audio presentation that I was telling you that Pamela had done, the one that was titled Mind Your Own Business. She talks about this presentation that she'd given this at the speaking engagement, and there was an individual who was supremely critical of her performance, and her friend knew how it was impacting her negatively. Like it was just one of those things where you just don't recover from it very easily. And we've all had those things said to us where, you just can spend not only the next day, but maybe the next week, if you allow yourself, just kind of rolling that over in your head. And her friend gave her this sage advice, and this is really important. I think we can all benefit from thinking this way. She said, don't go to bed with that guy tonight. He's living in your head rent-free, and you need to evict him. There are just going to be those moments, Amy, where we're living with awful, horrible, unprofessional things that other people, maybe even your manager, your supervisor, your spouse, they said those things to you. They're not going to feel any pain from your inability to get over it or your disdain for what they've said. It's only you that are going to have to live with that, and you're going to have to decide whether or not you're going to allow that thought to persist or if you're going to evict it. I think that's a great principle that we can all practice, and the better off we get with that, the better off we're going to be able to deal with criticism, warranted or unwarranted.
Wow. That is the biggest thing I have struggled with through this whole process and through my growth and being able to put myself out there. And I wish somebody would have said that to me. Don't you dare let that guy go to bed with you tonight.
It's great, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so good. It's so visual. We do that. We can have 100 good compliments, things that are going well. And maybe it's on a Facebook post or maybe it's just out in the world, but there's like one or two and they're just either trolling you or they're trying to provoke you. And it's so amazing how you can just get almost fixated on that and it can really hold you back.
And you got to refer to that body of evidence that you collected in the first step to remind yourself of all of the things that people said that you were doing so well, because that helps. That helps with the eviction notice, right? Because you've got all that support behind you that says people believe that I'm doing good things. They've said I'm doing good things. I can see that I'm doing good things that are propelling my customers towards the objectives that they want to achieve. This person who's trolling me on the internet. And if you're going to be on social media, if you're going to be producing Facebook live videos, or if you're going to be on YouTube, or if you're going to be producing regular blog posts or podcasts, somebody's going to have something to say about how you're rubbing them the wrong way. So don't let them live in your head. So I'll just recap real quick, Amy. 6 things that you can do to create sway. This is the stuff you're doing to build influence with the people that you serve. Number 1, you track your performance. Number 2, you talk about your results. Number 3, you share credit when credit needs to be shared. Number 4, you take credit for your ideas. Number 5, learn how to receive a compliment. And number 6, deal with criticism. And I assure you that if you'll practice these things, then you'll be well on your way to establishing influence.
There's about 7 other big topics that I really wanted to jump in. And I know that we're getting short on time. I'd love to have you back another time.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I think that there's, like all things, the wells are deep, and you find that there's a lot more to discuss that come out from relevant topics, as you go through them, and there's never enough time. So happy to do that, Amy. It's a pleasure being here with you. I really appreciate you inviting me on. I respect the work that you're doing and the audience that you're serving.
Thank you so much. Mark, where can our listeners find more about you?
Sure. So Twitter at Mark Slemons. If you go to my website, markslemons.com, you can find podcasts and show notes and stuff there, resources that I've referenced in the episodes. iTunes, obviously, Stitcher, Google Play. You can find the Leader to Leader podcast with Mark Slemons, and those are the best places. But feel free, if you have questions or you have thoughts or something that you want to talk about, don't ever hesitate to drop me an email to mark@markslemons.com, and that's SLEMONS.com.
Oh, that's great. Mark, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Amy. It was a pleasure.
Oh my word, he is so good. Besides having this immense body of knowledge, this technical side, Mark has this human compassion, kindness. He really exemplifies what his podcast does, teaching leaders how to be better leaders. If each one of us, the smart, ambitious women, can take these lessons, implement them in our lives, and become better leaders, imagine what we can create together. I want to share with you each week lessons that I'm learning. There are things that I share to my email list that I do not share to anyone else. If you'd like to know more, go to thinkandrich.com/message. We know when you enrich a woman's life, you change her entire circle of influence. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you soon.